Stripling. I'm going to be both moderating and the first speaker, so I have hereby allotted myself an extra 15 minutes, and I have put the word out, the kibosh, that anyone who comes in late will have to do 25 push-ups. If you're coming to hear about Shiloh Season 4, this is not it. There was no Shiloh Season 4, so we already had the program created by the time that change came about when it canceled at the last minute. So rather than rehash the past, we are going to talk about a completely different topic, which is debunking the City of David temple myth. Craig Evans and I wrote an article which will be out in a few weeks in the new issue of Near East Archaeological Society Bulletin, which is our society's peer-reviewed journal, and it is on the location of the Jewish temples. And you may think, well, that's self-evident. Why do we need to talk about that? Unless you've had your head in the sand, we have tens of millions of American evangelicals who are now convinced by YouTube videos of people who've been to Israel twice. And they are now convinced that the city of David is where the temples actually stood, first and second temples. Their motivation is eschatological almost entirely. They're looking for a way to rebuild a third temple in their eschatological scheme. This is sort of God's will that we're going to rebuild a third temple and reinstitute animal sacrifices, and then the end can come. So they're in a big hurry to end things. My view is that Jesus doesn't need our help. He's got it all under control. And we'll talk about the various theories, how those belief systems came about, look at the two proposals. If you were to search YouTube, please don't do it right now, and search location of the temple, you would see YouTube videos with north of 1.5 million views and growing daily, and various groups that are advocating this. Whereas within academia, none of us believe. There is no scholar who believes that the temple wasn't on the Temple Mount. But of course, in today's world, if you can get 1.5 million views on YouTube, you've got a lot of influence. So Craig and I wrote the new article in hopes to drive a stake to the heart of this idea. We will spin off into a popular article in BAR and a couple of other places too. And I've done recently a series of 3 or 4 TV programs on digging for truth on the topic. And we're doing this type of a lecture. And now I'm going to send you out as emissaries to set the record straight. So here we go, debunking the City of David temple myth. You're all familiar with this. This is Rittmeyer's rendering of the Second Temple, and this is about 20 football fields in size. You have the temple itself oriented to the east. You have the court of the women here. You have the soreg, where we have the prohibition signs, Gentiles crossing this point will be responsible for their own death. We'll talk about that. Several pools, the Pool of Israel, the Struthian Pool also to the north, and then the Pool of Siloam to the south. Wilson's Arch, which brings in the aqueducts from Bethlehem. We have an upper and a lower aqueduct, one built in 100 BC, the other built in 20 BC, that brought an abundance of water to the Temple Mount, and that's going to play into this myth very heavily. Then, of course, the Royal Stoa on the southern approach, the double gate and the triple gate, and then the Hulda gates. If you go down those steps, that will lead you very much downhill to the City of David. And if you've ever walked up that, you know how steep it is. And what I'm going to show you, the logical fallacy, if the temple was located in the City of David, as our evangelical friends are claiming, what I'm going to call revisionists, are claiming, then we've got archaeological material that is migrating uphill. And a lot of archaeological material, because it's all next to what they think is the Antonia fortress. So the revisionists believe that this is where the Antonia fortress is. You can see the location of the Antonia fortress on the northwest corner there. What they would say is that this is the platform of the Antonia fortress. And if so, what I'm going to explore with you today is how do we get all of this Jewish material on the Antonia, including mikvaot, on the Antonia Fortress platform, and how did it all migrate uphill? So, buckle up. Frankie Snyder has a new article also in the new NEASB that's about to be released called Opus Sectili, and you have followed this, I think, for some time. Frankie spoke here a couple of years ago. These are cut stones, worked stones, and they have been recovered from the southeast corner of the Temple Mount. Now, I worked for 2 years as a supervisor on this project, and so I personally saw some of these as they were being discovered, was with Frankie as she cracked the geometric code of what the paving looked like on the Second Temple. So it's pretty interesting because we now know what the roofing looked like on the Second Temple. We now know what the flooring looked like on the Second Temple. We know a lot about the structure itself, but these are actual tiles, opus sectili, as Josephus would call them, from the Second Temple period. They all come from the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, the destruction that occurred there 15 years ago. And none of them come from the city of David. So the city of David has been excavated by Raymond Weil, by Crowfoot, Kenyon, Yigal Shiloh, Mazar and Mazar, Reich and Shukran. I mean, you've got numerous, extensive excavations over more than 100 years, and there's not one opus sectili that has come from there. So if we have Josephus and then an actual inscription that I'll show you talking about this paving on the Temple Mount, then why are they all up here on the supposed Antonia fortress and none of them are down where the temple was supposed to stand? This is the Pool of Bethesda, of course, where St. Anne's Church is today. And you can see the 5 sides that are mentioned in the Bible. If a pilgrim were coming from the north up to the Temple Mount, he would pass through ritual immersion in the Pool of Bethesda. I believe this is a massive public mikvah. And if the pilgrim was coming from the south, he would pass through the Pool of Siloam. The 36 mikvaot, 37 now, a brand new one was just found, on and around the Temple Mount, probably only serviced the priests or special events and so forth that were taking place on the Temple Mount proper. So I think what you're looking at here are large public mikvaot. And the reason I'm showing this is I want you to know that there is an abundance of water around and on the Temple Mount. The revisionists base their claim largely, primarily, on the argument that there was a spring on the Temple Mount. And they're going to use the letter of Aristeas, 89 through 135, and Aristeas, which claims that there was a spring on the Temple Mount itself. And then you have Tacitus, who has some similar language. So we're going to explore where that came from and why it's not reliable information. This is the Pool of Siloam as one is approaching from the south. You know that half of that has been excavated today, and you're at the very end of the city of David at this point. Tyropian Valley on one side, Hinnom Valley on the other. This is the lower aqueduct, which I mentioned. I was in Jerusalem a couple of months ago. I was able to get in on a journalist visa and was able to go exploring a few days on my own. And knowing that I was going to do this presentation, I went and explored the aqueduct system. This is at Jaffa Gate. So if you can picture walking into Jaffa Gate, if you go underneath the modern bridge that's there and just go walk under there, you'll see this is the final stage of the lower aqueduct. And you can trace it all the way from Bethlehem, both lower and upper aqueducts. It's been done by as early as Wilson and Schick, and then in modern times by Ami Mazar and Shimon Gibson. So you can trace this all the way from Bethlehem, various sections of it, bringing massive amounts of water. And this is the last section that would then lead you to Wilson's Arch. So you've got Wilson's Bridge. The arch then is bringing that last section of water. You've got one cistern on the Temple Mount that holds 10 million gallons of water. One cistern holds 10 million gallons of water, and you have countless cisterns. So when people talk about, well, you have to have a massive amount of water to operate a sacrificial system, there was a massive amount of water. And there were 2 aqueducts committed to bringing this water in, and then you've got a massive storage system that's going on as well. And of course, when no one's around, one can sit on the aqueduct and have one's picture taken. This is the lower aqueduct. The lower aqueduct is built about 100 BC. When was the letter of Aristeas written? About 150 BC. And of course, we'll deal with this in great detail in our article. It's part of the pseudepigrapha. And those that would claim that the water that he's referring to is water from this aqueduct, that's not possible because the letter is written before the first and second aqueducts are built. Lower aqueduct, 100 BC. Upper aqueduct, 20 BC. And here's a close-up look at the Antonia fortress. Our revisionist friends will try to make the case that there had to be a legion or a regiment housed inside here. Josephus doesn't say that. There's nowhere where that's recorded. Clearly, there were soldiers that were in there, probably hundreds of them, officers. And then the soldiers themselves are probably camped out next to the Struthian pool. You have soldiers over by Jaffa Gate, near Herod's palace. You have soldiers on patrol. You have soldiers at Herodium. But there's nothing in any ancient text that requires that a regiment be housed here. It's always monitored. This is where Paul is dragged. Paul is making his defense here when they accuse him of bringing a Gentile past the Soreg. And so he actually stands up right here and makes his defense. And then to save his life, they bring him into the Antonia fortress. Now, here's where the archaeology comes into play. Do you see these holes, these pocks? In the bedrock itself, some of these support beams for the northern portico are still there. So even though the Temple Mount was destroyed, the Antonia fortress was destroyed, and according to Josephus, razed to its foundations. Razed to its foundations. So if we have 30 courses in the historical Temple Mount that are still standing, how could it possibly have been razed to its foundations? Makes no sense. So you can go here today and see these pocks still in the bedrock, and these courses, where the way Rittmeyer has drawn this, these courses are still in situ from the Antonia fortress with the pocks in them to support the beams from the northern portico. If it's not for the Antonia fortress, then what is it? So you mean to tell me that the Antonia fortress itself had a structure on its northwest corner? So the Antonia fortress is on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, and now we've got something else on its northwest corner. It just simply doesn't add up. David Graves did me the favor of drawing the revisionist positions. Rittmeyer originally did it, and then he said, I don't want my name on a drawing of the revisionist view. Don't use my drawings. And so I got David to do me a couple of watercolor drawings so you could picture this. We have two different revisionist views, what I'm going to call Proposal 1 and Proposal 2. Proposal 1 is by Ernst Martin, several decades old. He believes that the temple was built over the Gihon spring, and following Aristeas, essentially, that there was a spring within the Temple Mount precincts. At least he's consistent about that. The Cornuke proposal, which is Proposal 2, has it a little higher up on the Ophel. So they would point out that there's a bridge that connects, in their view, the Antonia fortress with the temple right here. This is the Ophel. Of course, Mazar and Mazar excavated here for decades, and the southwest corner, of course, not only Mazar, but also Reich and Shukron. So we've got a lot of archaeological data. When I was in Jerusalem 2 months ago, I spent 2 days with Eli Shukron, who spent 25 years excavating this, and retraced every step and verified where the material came from and talked it all through. Our revisionist friends, the Cornuke crowd in particular, Proposal 2, they have gone out, and if you've read Cornuke's book or you've heard interviews by him, and goodness knows there's millions of people who've watched these YouTube videos, they go out of their way to make it sound like Eli Shukron believes that the temple was in the city of David. Now, Eli Shukron, Reich and Shukron's new volume just came out a few weeks ago. Eli Shukron is livid about this, of course. When Eli Shukron says there was a temple in the city of David, he's not talking about Solomon's temple. He's talking about adjacent to the Gihon spring. I was on TBN doing a 4-part series this last week. I did a 30-minute program on this of a temple dating back to the Middle Bronze Age and in use until the 8th century, right next to the Gihon spring, probably where David's tabernacle was. I mean, it's a very important and significant temple site. Put a tent over it, and I think maybe you've actually got the location of David's tabernacle, where the ark is for a generation. Has nothing to do with the location of Solomon's temple. They took the Ark of the Covenant up out of the city of David onto the Temple Mount. It's very disingenuous for the revisionists to imply that Eli Shukron, a very eminent archaeologist, believes that Solomon's temple, first or second temple for that matter, was located in the Temple Mount. Shukron is on record, and I quote him in our new article as saying this, again attempting to set the record straight. So let me go back. Here's proposal 1. This is the Martin proposal. He has this over the Gihon Spring. Now I'm going to show you in a minute the big problem with this. There's many big problems, but one of them is that there is a massive garbage dump from the Second Temple period that is floor to ceiling garbage accumulated over hundreds of years that is right here. And it covers the whole slope. It's been excavated. It's a matter of archaeological record. You can't have the temple and a garbage dump accumulating underneath it at the same time. But again, these are not archaeologists. They would call themselves researchers. And of course, you've got to love a good conspiracy theory. And so, we archaeologists, what would we know? So we don't have our own YouTube channel. What would we know? This is proposal 2, the Kornuk proposal, and it's a little closer. And we've actually got a public building and a mikveh right here that I'll show you in just a second. Now here's the slope. You can see the historical Temple Mount, Haram Sharif, the historical Temple Mount, the southern gate. And here's the garbage dump. This whole slope is a massive garbage dump. Here's what it looked like years ago before excavation began along the slope here. That's all garbage. Literally 15 meters of garbage, 70, 80 meters wide, so like a football field of garbage. And we can date garbage. I mean, we love garbage as archaeologists. We can date all this stuff. It's broken, but we can... there's pottery in there, there's coins in there, like by the thousands. And there's lots of ways that we can date even the stratigraphy of the garbage. Think of, for example, Oxyrhynchus that Craig Evans talked about yesterday. Within the Oxyrhynchus garbage dump, there's a stratigraphy that exists. So back here for a second. Do you see where it's been excavated? This section and this section have been excavated. Kathleen Kenyon's dump from the 1960s is right here. How is it possible? This is the Gihon Spring, and this has been excavated. That means the garbage is still standing there. Picture the room you're in, floor to ceiling, still standing. How is the temple there? How's this garbage accumulating 15 meters high while the temple is still standing there? It simply doesn't, it's not possible. Now you may be thinking, well, what would they say? How would they respond to that? I really don't know. I would just love to find out. This is a picture I took when I was there 6 or 8 weeks ago. This is what it looks like today on that slope. This is still existing garbage dump, Mount of Olives over here, that is from the Second Temple period. Shukron and I were talking about a future project to do another section of this. Deal with Kenyon's old dump pile and then deal with a section of this garbage dump. This photo, Todd Boland's article and website, of course, very, very well known. Todd had this picture when the new Eastern Wall was found, 2 or 3 months ago. It was a new section of it because Shukron had uncovered a section, Kenyon had a section, but this kind of helped establish that this is the eastern city wall of the city of David from the Second Temple period. And you can see this wall all through this area. And here's a section of it going back to Kenyon's time. So this is that eastern wall. So we know quite a bit. We know where the eastern wall was. We know where the garbage dump was. Believe it or not, we know where the temple stood. And we know where the Gihon Spring is. We may now even know where David's tabernacle was located. Now, this is another drawing from our article. This is Mount Moriah with nothing on it. David, of course, purchases the threshing floor of Aruana. And our revisionist friends make a big point out of this. None of them are pastoralists. None of them are archaeologists. But this is a big, big part of their argument. Aruana, they would tell you, is a Jebusite. And the city of David is the Jebusite city. Therefore, the threshing floor of Aruana must have been within the city of David. Now, folks, we all know that in an ancient city, at least half the population lives outside the city walls, especially the agrarian portion. You've got the extramural population and the intramural population, and they have a symbiotic relationship. They need each other. Threshing floors, there is not one example in the land of the Bible of a threshing floor inside a city. Go back and read the book of Ruth. See where Boaz's threshing floor is. It specifically says it's outside the city. You don't have a threshing floor inside the city. It's illogical. So picture the 12 acres of the city of David, the original Zion, the glory of the nations in David's view. And just up above it is Aruana's agricultural precinct, which David purchases from him. And so you've got a threshing floor somewhere in this area. And they're going to tell you, well, you know, the Dome of the Rock, it's jagged rock there. That can't possibly be a threshing floor. No one said that it was on that exact spot. Okay, it's like when Kathleen Kenyon tried to tell us, well, the walls of Jericho are Middle Bronze Age walls, not Late Bronze Age walls. Therefore, the Bible can't be true. We aren't arguing when the walls were built. We're arguing when they fell. Okay, so it's a straw man argument here. We're not saying that it's on the spot where Abraham bound his son, but it's in that area. You've got a flat area, and there's a number. It's stepped. So you've got a number of steps. So you have a threshing floor in this area. Probably it's terraced with vineyards and wheat fields and so forth. Quite frankly, we don't have access to this area. So, you know, we can't get in under there until there's another major earthquake. And remember, in the 1920s, you had 3 earthquakes in Jerusalem. And the 1930s, you had another big earthquake. So Hamilton was brought in, and Hamilton supervised the repairs on the Dome of the Rock. And that's the last, you know, major insight we've had to what's underneath there. And Hamilton documented the remains of a church. He would not let it be published until he died, because he didn't want to lose access to the Temple Mount. But we know very little since the time of the explorers. So it's going to take a disaster to give us access, like the destruction of the southeast corner 15 years ago. Now, this brings us to the letter of Aristeas. The water supply, he writes, is inexhaustible, for an abundant natural spring pours forth within the temple area, and there are furthermore marvelous underground reservoirs passing description to a distance of 5 stades, as was pointed out to me, round the foundations of the temple. Of these, each had innumerable pipes, so that the various channels converged at several reservoirs. Note that there is an abundant natural spring that pours forth within the temple. Now, if someone had never been to Jerusalem, but he had read Isaiah and Micah and Ezekiel, what might he think? Futuristic passages about a future temple or a messianic temple or a metaphorical temple, that there would be springs flowing forth from the Temple Mount. He might just conflate the two. And apparently that's what's happened. Aristeas records in paragraphs 116 and 117, are you sitting down? He records that the Jordan River flows into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, anyone been to Israel? A Jewish child would know that the Jordan River does not flow into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, what did we just do with the credibility of Aristeas? There's a reason he's part of the pseudepigrapha. There's a reason he's writing under a false name. He's been gaslighted, or he's gaslighting somebody else's. Jerusalem, we have a problem, okay? The Jordan River doesn't flow into the Mediterranean Sea, and there's no spring on the Temple Mount, nor do you need it, because you have the massive reservoir system and aqueduct system that I've been describing. The rationale that you can't have a sacrificial system without a spring, let's take that back to Shiloh, something I know a little bit about. At Shiloh, we have the sacrificial system operating for 300 years before Jerusalem. Animal sacrifice. Was there a spring there? No. Ein Silun is a full kilometer from any location of the tabernacle at Shiloh. So clearly for 300 years they operated a sacrificial system without a spring. So you see how the logic breaks down for this idea that you can't have a sacrificial system on the Temple Mount without a spring. Now Tacitus comes along about 100 AD, Cornelius Tacitus, and he compounds the problem when he mentions that within the enclosure is an overflowing spring or a font of some kind. Now, where did he get this idea? is there any evidence of this? And of course, in the city of David, there is no archaeological evidence at all to support this. Had Tacitus been to Jerusalem? I think not. We'll dig into that a little bit deeper. We also have the Pilgrim of Bordeaux. And when you watch these YouTube videos, you'll hear them talk about the Pilgrim of Bordeaux. Well-known pilgrim, early pilgrim account. He says that there was water springs on the Temple Mount. And listen to what else he says. The Pilgrim of Bordeaux also says that the Transfiguration was on the Mount of Olives. He also says that Hezekiah and Isaiah are buried in the Kidron Valley. He claims that water from the Gihon spring did not flow on the Sabbath. He claims that the temple pavement was stained still with Zechariah's blood. He claims there was a crypt in which Solomon tortured demons. There was a stone where Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. There was a pool on both sides of the temple. And a lot more. I just picked out a few. Now, do any of you believe any of that stuff? Our pilgrim has been gaslighted, okay? He's been taken around and shown this and shown that, and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. So when some tour guide told him that there was a spring on the Temple Mount, this is what else the tour guide told him. He wrote it down. We're not doubting that he wrote it in his journal. We're asking, is it reliable? And it's not. On the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, you have this inscription, "To the place of the trumpeting." It falls down about 138 feet. Josephus in Book 5 tells us that on the beginning of Shabbat and the end of Shabbat, that a trumpeter sounded the shofar from the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Where was this inscription found? Exactly at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, covered with massive stones. Massive stones. So, if our Temple Mount was really the Antonia fortress and the temple was really down in the city of David, somebody pushed all these stones uphill. And it would take like modern machinery to move these stones and then to cover that inscription. And there's plaster in the crevices of the inscription. And what it really says is, "To the place of the trumpeting." This was not to be read by passers-by. The revisionists would say, well, it's too small to be read, so it came from somewhere else. They're missing the whole point. It's cut, and then it's a special stone, so it tells the masons where this goes in the southwest corner. Then they plaster over it. All this is directions, so they know where to set that specific stone, found at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Then we have the Soreg, 24 inscriptions on the Soreg that say, 12 in Latin and 12 in Greek, Gentiles who cross this point are responsible for their own death. 2 have been found, both in Greek, and this is the one that was found near St. Stephen's Gate, north of the Temple Mount. The other was at Elatim Gate, north of the Temple Mount. Both of the Soreg inscriptions are north of the Temple Mount, okay? Well north of the Temple Mount, not south of the Temple Mount. If the temple was in the city of David, how did these inscriptions get a half mile uphill north of the Temple Mount? It begins to become inductive. Reichen Shukron from a drainage channel at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. The revisionist will tell you, no, this came from a drainage channel further down toward the city of David. I walked it with Shukron recently, and he showed me exactly where it came from, right under Robinson's Arch, southwest corner of the Temple Mount. This gold bell. Now, we know from Ezekiel 27, Ezekiel 28, that priests had bells on the hem of their garments. Can't tell you for certain that that's, such a lofty purpose for this bell, but it certainly could be. Shukron believes that this is also in the shape of a pomegranate, which the Bible specifically says that the priests had bells and pomegranates on the hem of their garment. I think there's some dispute about whether it has that shape, but it's certainly a golden bell, and it comes from the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Right next to it is a ritual purity token in Aramaic, pure unto Yah. Pure unto Yah. What's this doing on the Antonia fortress? They're practicing Jewish ritual purity on the Antonia fortress, and they've got 37 mikvaot, and they're requiring that people go through ritual immersion before they go up on the Temple Mount. Doesn't add up. Either this is a stamp indicating that someone has gone through ritual immersion so they can now ascend. Paul went through the rites of purification before he ascended the Temple Mount, or it's literally a token that a person would take to indicate that he or she is eligible to go up on the Temple Mount. Now, at the southwest corner, there's another inscription. This one is interesting. It's called the Korban inscription. So it's noting a sacrificial offering, along with a drawing of two upside-down birds. This is, the least expensive sacrifice is the turtle dove, dating to the 1st century. And it illustrates the practice of offering two doves or pigeons as a sacrifice during the time of Jesus by those who could not afford a lamb. And guess where it was found? At the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. So, if the Temple Mount is really the Antonia fortress, they seem to be operating a sacrificial system there. You can see the upside-down birds and the Korban inscription. All right, so I've run through a lot. Tacitus, Aristeas, the Pilgrim of Bordeaux. Eusebius cites 3 examples that the revisionists try to use also, but none of them specifically say anything about a spring on the Temple Mount. The Martin proposal and the Cornuke proposal have gained massive traction within, sadly to say, evangelical circles, and we've now juxtaposed it with the evidence, and we've asked some tough questions. Is there any evidence that the first or second temple was in the city of David? And the answer is no. We do not have opus sectile there. We do not have bells. We do not have ritual purity tokens. We do not have the soreg inscriptions. We don't have the korban inscriptions. We do not have the mikvaot. All of these encircle and or a part of the historical Temple Mount on the Haram al-Sharif. Finally, 30 courses still stand in the western wall, and Josephus specifically says that the foundations of the Antonia fortress were raised. Now, if you go northwest of the Temple Mount, you'll see the foundations have been raised with only those few courses surviving, which ended up probably getting buried. So that's the state of affairs. Is there anyone in here who has not heard of this controversy or this problem? Yeah, we hated to give airtime to this, but we thought we finally needed to set the record straight. So with that, I believe I've got a few minutes for Q&A. Yes, sir.
Is the name Cornuke, in your opinion,
I didn't hear.
In your opinion, is the name Cornuke ever associated with quality scholarship?
No.
He asked my opinion. No.
Like science.
Say it again, Scott. One more time.
Yeah, is any of Cornuke's research valid? Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. Listen, these are sincere people, I think, for the most part. I have no way of judging anyone's motives, and I'm not saying I'm a better Christian than anyone. We're just trying to deal with the historical record and to set it straight. Yeah, but to my knowledge, no. Yes, sir.
Scott, didn't I read a couple weeks ago that they just found like an amulet or something like that made of nice stone with a couple of inscriptions on it or something? Do you remember that?
Not clear what you're referring to.
Yeah, sorry. I can't
Yes, sir.
remember exactly.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
How are you?
Good.
Where will this presentation be published soon, you said?
A Near East Archaeological Society bulletin, which is our peer-reviewed journal, and it should be out in a few weeks, I think. So if you're not a member of NEAS, you should join, and then you get NESB and artifacts as part of that.
Come
Yeah.
to the booth, we got membership
And
fees.
we also plan to do a popular version of this, and we have on ABR's Digging for Truth, we've done a 3-part series recently on this as well. So you can find those resources and share them, because right now we've got 1.5 million views by Yahweh's Restoration Ministry on Why the Temple's in the Temple Mount, and we've got 10,000 views on ours. Yes, sir. Dale?
Where does the Temple Institute idea fit into? Are they attempting to rebuild the temple on the rock location or in the Ophel location, or what?
Yeah, no, they're definitely not in the Ophel location. So they believe that the temple stood here, but of course there's alternate views of a little bit to the north, a little bit to the south. Yeah. You're talking about Hillel Richmond and his father in the Temple Institute. Yes. Yes, Ernesto?
Excuse me, Scott. I have a question. So Josephus is a reliable information for you?
Is Josephus a reliable historical source generally? We don't take him uncritically. You know, there are times that he conflates this or that, but generally we take him as a reliable historical source. Yes. Yes, sir.
Why would they dump garbage on or near Kidron Spring?
Yeah, good question. Once Hezekiah's tunnel comes into existence, the Gihon Spring is not a big deal at that point. It's covered with garbage. They're accessing water at other points from it. And so why they chose to do that, I don't know. But it's not even a significant thing at that point, once Hezekiah's tunnel is cut. Yes?
Incidental question, but where's Solomon's portico on the diagram?
Okay, so here is the royal stoa, and then Solomon's porch or portico is this line. So you can see it on these sides here.
Just not showing the
Yeah.
diagram.
Yep. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir.
The place of trumpeting, is that the cockcrow? It's not a rooster? Is it...
Oh, it's no.
Is the place of trumpeting, is that what cockcrow is? Is it a trumpet blast or is it a rooster?
No, it's a trumpet blast. Yeah, it's a shofar.
So the translation of the Bible where it says the rooster crows is the trumpet, not a rooster?
No, I think it's a rooster. Yeah, I think they're two different things. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir.
I was a few minutes late. You may have mentioned this, but where would you put the beautiful gate?
Right over here. Same with the eastern gate, essentially. But I'm not dogmatic.
You line it with the Eastern Gate?
Yeah, I'm not dogmatic on that, but that's what I think. Okay, yes, sir.
How deep, when you were under that, obviously you've got steel reinforced concrete, how far underground were you? You have a civilization that's obviously growing on top of another one. How deep is that aqueduct you're sitting on?
That aqueduct is above ground now.
Oh, really? Okay. So that was so it's an elevated structure.
Yes.
So you're not below ground.
That's an elevated structure. I once excavated 165 meters of an aqueduct dating to a first century aqueduct. It's identical to that one. So apparently there's a typology. Yes, sir.
On this aqueduct, it came from Bethlehem, it said. There were, Solomon's pools, if I remember correctly, in Bethlehem?
Yes.
Is there any point, and they have to run it through the mountain, is there a point where they have to use siphoning principles on that aqueduct?
The question is, was there any siphoning due to gravity flow and so forth? Not that I know of. I'd have to look into it more deeply. It's been published, but I don't know off the top of my head. Yes. Okay, well, last question.
How far back, you said that the garbage that's piled there, how far back have you guys dated that garbage that is in that location?
How old is the garbage in the garbage dump? Okay, so it begins to accumulate in the Hasmonean period, maybe even just before that, 3rd century BC. So you've got several hundred years of garbage that has accumulated there. And so, again, this is the Martin proposal has the temple where the garbage dump is. So the garbage is supposedly accumulating underneath it for hundreds of years while it's there. So, okay, we've got a 10-minute break. Thank you. Thank you, brother.